Hi everyone, hope you're doing great. In the last few videos, we saw how we vertically and horizontally align our items on our web page flexibly using Flexbox. But sometimes we also want beautiful grids in our websites, right? And for that, we use CSS Grid. In this videos, we are going to see CSS grids in its full power and we are going to apply all the concepts. So let's get right into it.
So in this video, we are going to look at grid container and CSS grids. Let's get right into it. So यहाँ पे जल्दी से मैं HTML का डॉक्यूमेंट बना लेता हूँ and in this I'll write grid container जो कि हमारा grid contain करेगा, right? हम what is grid container वो भी थोड़ी देर में देखते हैं. Let's just create a grid container. So grid requires a container and inside that grid container we need to add the grid elements. ठीक है? So let's just add grid item. Let's just add 5 items. Okay, these are all grid items, and in all of these items I'll write item and then the number of that item: item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5. So each grid item is having two classes. One is grid item itself and one is the item number, whatever item is it having. All right, अब यहाँ पे ध्यान से देखना. Let me just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here as well. Right? Okay, so let me just give some stylings to these grid items and उसके बाद हम देखते हैं what is grid, what is all about, क्या है ये grid and why do we use that. ठीक है? So first of all, of course, box sizing, border box to all of these elements, and of course margin 0, right? Body को let's give it a background color, some dark background color and black, right? And I'll just choose a lighter shade of it so this looks fine. Okay, all right. And okay, and for every grid item I'll just give it a background color of blue, of course a lighter shade of that because it should look fine. Okay, of course I've not added a class there, so I have to use the class here. So this is how we are having these items. Let me just lighten this color more a little bit. Okay, all right. Let me just give it a font size also so that everything is clearly visible. Font size of 2 rem, right? So these are all the grid items. Let me just give it a border also so that we know where a grid item is starting and ending. Let me just give 2 pixels of white. I'll just create this a little bit off white, so a little bit darker. Okay, all right. So borders 2 pixels. We have not added solid here, so solid this color, right? We just make it a little bit lighter, more lighter, right? This looks fine, correct? So these are our grid items. Now how to use and what is the use of CSS grids? We already know what is Flexbox and how does Flexbox work, right? Flexbox is used to align items flexibly along one direction, either row or column. We know, right? Flex display, flex, we align items center, justify content center, flex direction, row or column, right? We know these things, right? But what if I want a complicated grid where I want to align items in both the directions, rows and columns as well? So imagine a table kind of thing where the first you can say row is having only one column, next row is having 2 columns, next row is having 3 columns, or maybe something like that, right? Some complicated layout. So that's why we use CSS grids. So in this video we are going to go through all the required properties which you should know in order to use CSS grids, and let's get straight into it. So first of all, just like in displayfx we made a container in which every item was added. In this grid also we need a grid container which will be containing the grid container, and inside this grid container I'll give it a display grid here. Now as of now we don't see any change in our layout. Like in Flexbox, you know, things which were aligned in the row order would align themselves in column order as soon as we give them display flex, but in grid we don't see this change, right? So let's just discuss the next thing is grid template columns, right? These are all the properties we are going to go through. So grid template columns is one of the property. So let me just say that, let me just assume like our grid will be having 2 rows, right? Basically 2 columns, and everything should be aligned according to that, right? Let me just first give it display flex align item center, justify content center, correct. So that they come in, and I'll just give it a height of 100 vh also, so that our grid comes into the center, correct. Width, I'll not give it width as of now, but you can see this is how the grid is looking right now. Okay. If I want everything to align themselves according to the rows, right, I'll just give it grid template row, grid template columns, right, columns. We need two columns, COLUMS, grid columns. If I want two columns of first column should be of size 200 pixel, you can see I'm having first column of size 200 pixel. If I want one more column, I'll space and I'll write the second column should be of size 400 pixel. So you can see the first column is of size 200 pixel and the second column is of size 400 pixels, right. This is 400 pixels wide if you are talking about columns, correct. So this is grid template columns. If I want to use another column, so you can see right now 1 2 and 3 is wrapping around to the next line. If I want another 100 pixel column, I'll just write this and 3 will automatically use that column, right. So items, grid items will automatically take the shape which is required, right. Let's talk about grid, the next property, which is of course grid template columns but with a twist. So let me just write here. So for example, I want the first column to take twice as much as space as the second column. So here I can write, instead of pixels, I can write two fractions and one fraction. So we are definitely having two columns, correct, but the first column is having the size twice as the second column. Okay, twice as much as second column. Let me, if I remove this, you can imagine like this, because that is really small down there, so I'm not using that. So you can see that now the first column is taking twice as much as size as the second column. If I add another column, if I add three fraction, so you can see we are having three columns. Our grid items are automatically arranging themselves. First column is the twice of the second column, and the third column is the twice of the thrice of the second column, because it's having three fractions, right. Now for example, we need to have multiple columns, right. We also can use these properties for rows as well. So grid template rows, grid template rows, this defines the number of rows we will be having. So let's say we are having only two columns. The first row should be of size 200 pixel, right, 200 pixel, this is 200 pixels, and the second row should be of size 400 pixel. If I define 400 pixels, you can see now the second row is having size 400 pixel, right. Now let's say if I want multiple rows, I don't have to, and I cannot write 200 pixels 200 pixels 200 pixels again and again. What I can do, I'll just write repeat. How many times this should repeat? Let's just say 2 times, and let's just say 200 pixels. So this will repeat 2 times. So 200 pixels 200 pixels will automatically take this shape, right. So this is grid template rows. Now let's go to the next property. We have seen the grid template rows. Now let's see grid auto rows. So you can see, let me just give you an example. In the first row, I'll just add some text, right. Lorem 50. Let me just write lorem, I'll just say lorem 25, and you can see the text is actually overflowing, right. Text is actually overflowing. Let me just add another you can say thing here, lorem 10, right. So this text is not actually overflowing, but this text which is greater than the total pixel height is actually overflowing. So what I can do is, instead of hard coding the template rows for the first row, I'll just say the first row should be, let's just say the first row should not be this what do you call this, this first row should not be the hard coded to 200 pixel. It should be auto. If I give an auto property here and a 200 pixel property here, right, so you can see now it is not overflowing, and now it is taking the whole space, right. We are not hard coding it. If I hard coded it 200 pixels here, so it would be, everything would be overflowing. But if I say auto here, so the first row will take whatever the maximum content size is, and it will automatically adjust itself, right. So this is about grid template rows. We can definitely use min max property. For example, if I want the first row to be minimum of size 150, let me just do that on the second row. So if I write min max of 150 pixel, this is the min size and maximum should be auto. So the minimum size 3 will be having is what, 150 pixels. Now if 3 is also having some content in it, let me just add this content, or let me just add some more content. You can see now it is taking auto size. Now हमने देखा how to use this property called grid template rows and grid template columns. Let's see some other properties which are like grid row gap and grid column gap. Okay, so in this grid container I say grid row gap. Okay, if I say 1 rem here, so you can see all the rows are having gap of 1 rem, correct? Now if I say grid column gap, I say 2 rem here, all the rows are having a gap of 2 rem. Okay, now if I don't want to specify like this, I can only write here grid gap, and if I say 1 rem, rows and columns both will have a gap of 1 rem. ठीक है, and if मैं चाहता हूँ कि कॉलम को डिफरेंट गैप एंड रो को डिफरेंट गैप, आई राइट 2 rem here. देख लो 1 rep is for row and the 2 rem जो मैंने लिखा है it is for column. So if you write 2 variables here, 2 numbers, तो basically first number is for row gap and the second number is for column gap. ठीक है, all right, let's move on to the next thing, right? Grid template area. Now there's a method in grids, like this is very confusing for some people. अब इसको हम ध्यान से समझते हैं, ठीक है? So I'll just remove this grid template rows and template columns. ठीक है, यहाँ पे I'll just say grid, what is the property? Template area, template areas. ठीक है, and यहाँ पे मैं क्या लिखूंगा, यहाँ पे ध्यान से देखना, header. I want this one to act as a header and come at the top and take all of the area in the top row. I want this 2 as a sidebar and I want it to take 2 column worth of 2 rows worth of area, right? One will be taking the whole first row, 2 will be taking the like second column, you can see, right? Second row and the third row, and 3 will be starting at the column number 2 and it will also be taking 2 rows worth of space, right? So something, if I draw like this, I want everything to be aligned like this. So this should be my 1, this should be my 2, and this should be my 3. Or let's just do one thing, यहाँ पे this will be my 3 and this will be my 4, correct? This is header, this is sidebar, this is content A, this is content B. Okay, now let's go here and यहाँ पे I'll define header in the first row. Yeah, similarly in the next line I'll define, यहाँ पे क्या आ रहा है देख लो, here should be a sidebar. ठीक है, तो sidebar and content A, सही है, and in the next row I want sidebar with content B, correct? अभी don't look at this output, we have not used this anywhere. ठीक है, तो this is how my grid should look like. अब यहाँ पे ध्यान से देखना, dot item 1, and similarly I will be having other items, item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5. So item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5. ठीक है, इन item 1 मैं क्या बोलूंगा, ध्यान से देखना, grid area, इसको मैं हेडर दे दूंगा. देख लो मैंने 1 आइटम को हेडर दिया तो इसने अपने आप को ऐसे अलाइन कर लिया, करेक्ट? अब आइटम 2 को मैं ग्रिड एरिया देके साइड बार दे दूंगा, साइड बार. देख लो यहाँ पे ध्यान से, इट इज टेकिंग 2 रोज, है ना? 3 और 4 देख लो डिफरेंट रोज हैं, ये 2 रोज ले रही है, करेक्ट? इट इज टेकिंग 2 रोज एंड ये अपने आप को अलाइन कर रहे हैं. अभी इनको भी हम ठीक करते हैं, तो यहाँ पर आई राइट कंटेंट ए and here I'll write content B. ठीक है, this is how I'm aligning all of this stuff. अब यहाँ पे why is this taking too much space? क्योंकि of course it's having some content, इसके पास कुछ कंटेंट है. अगर 4 को हम कंटेंट दे दें तो फिर देखते हैं क्या होता है. देख लो 4 का कंटेंट आ गया एंड उसके हिसाब से 2 ने अपने आप को अरेंज कर लिया. इसको हटा देता हूँ, देखो 2 अभी छोटा है एंड इफ आई एड दिस 2 एक्चुअली स्पैन्स टू द साइज ऑफ द कंटेंट. ठीक है, इसको वी कैन डेफिनेटली हार्ड कोड ऑल्सो, ठीक है, बट इसको हम ऐसे भी कर सकते हैं. दिस इज वन वे ऑफ डिफाइनिंग कॉम्प्लिकेटेड ग्रिड. यहाँ पे देख लो, यूजिंग दिस वी डिफाइंड अ कॉम्प्लिकेटेड ग्रिड. करेक्ट है, सही है जी. अब हम लेट्स मूव टू द नेक्स्ट थिंग, ग्रिड कॉलम स्टार्ट, कॉलम एंड और ग्रिड कॉलम. ठीक है, अब देयर इज अनदर मेथड. इफ यू डोंट वांट टू यूज मेथड लाइक दिस, ऐसे नहीं करना चाहते तो यू हैव अनदर वे ऑफ डूइंग स्टफ. तो आई जस्ट कमेंट दिस कोड आउट, ऑल द कोड विच इज विद दिस ग्रिड एरिया रिलेटेड कोड. आई एम कमेंटिंग एवरीथिंग आउट. अब यहाँ पे क्या बोलूंगा मैं, I'll be achieving the same thing, but virtually imagine this as a grid with some rows and columns. So मैंने क्या बोला कि I want the item 1 to have 2 rows worth of or 2 columns worth of space. Correct. So item 1 should start from where? Grid. यहाँ पे ध्यान से देखना. We should write grid column start. कहाँ से स्टार्ट होना है? इट शुड स्टार्ट फ्रॉम द फर्स्ट कॉलम. दिस फर्स्ट कॉलम, दिस सेकंड कॉलम, दिस इज द थर्ड कॉलम. थर्ड कॉलम इज नथिंग इज देयर, बट स्टिल इट इज थर्ड कॉलम. ठीक है, तो इट शुड स्टार्ट फ्रॉम कॉलम नंबर 1 and it should end, grid column end is another property, it should end at column number 2. नहीं, column number 2 is wrong. अगर यहाँ पे मैं लिखता हूँ ना column 3, तो then it will act as, it will end at column number 2. So you have to specify, in the end you have to specify that column which is where it is ending +1. So if it's ending in column number 2, +1. ठीक है, अब 2 के पास it should span in terms of rows. तो item 2 should have grid row start and it should start at the first row or the second row. It should start at the second row because first row से तो 1 start हो रहा है. To start at the first second row. Grid row end, should it end at the third row or the fourth row? It is definitely ending at the third row, but we will write 4 here, and that's how it will span to the area. This is another method of using grids instead of defining this template areas and template columns. ठीक है, all right. यहाँ पे we are not using item 5, तो item 5 को भी let's use. तो item 5 में I'll write कि item 5 will be starting on, item 5 will be grid, definitely it's starting from the last only, so इसके column define करने हैं grid. अब यहाँ पे ध्यान से देखना, instead of writing start and end अलग अलग ना, मैं क्या करूँगा, grid column and I'll write it should start at the first column slash end at third column. तो देख लो 5 is taking that much space. तो ये हमने complicated grid बना दी using CSS. ठीक है, this is another method जिससे हम ये achieve कर सकते हैं. ठीक है, so this is all about grid. This is very brief, right? And you have to gain some experience and play around with these properties. जो properties I have listed here, you definitely have to play around with these properties. And using these properties, you can definitely create some complicated and beautiful grid designs using just CSS and HTML, right? So I hope you enjoyed this lecture and you're understanding everything which we are discussing. If you're enjoying, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Hope to see you in the next video. Until then, keep coding.